I think Mark gave a really great summary, and I can't disagree with anything that he brought up in terms of 2022. There's a few things that stand out for me, Arena. I think that from the perspective of outsourcing, business continuity as it relates to how outsourcers operate and what the buyers expect from the outsourcing community has been very important. This really came to the forefront, as we'll remember, at the outset of the COVID-19 pandemic. And it really hasn't gone away. It wasn't a flash in the pan. And something that I've been picking up in my research and my discussions with people over the course of the last 11 or 12 months has very much validated this, that there is an anticipation that if a buyer is going to work with an outsourcer, that outsourcer has to be I'm not going to say risk-free, but as risk resistant as possible. That whether it comes to delivery location, whether it comes to business model, whether it comes to the different technologies that they're applying, this BCP element is absolutely crucial. Now, another crucial thing that has really stood out for me from the standpoint of outsourcing and technology over the course of the past year relates to, again, no surprise, the laser focus that so many organizations have, whether it's the buyers themselves or the outsourcers, on data protection and information security. We are seeing an era now where it's becoming commonplace for organizations to not just be attacked by ransomware, but are more than willing to pay the money out just to get access back to their databases and to their servers. And I find it very worrying that in the outsourcing community, as Mark well knows, we are constantly hearing behind the scenes stories of different providers that have been attacked and different providers that have scrambled to try and deal with the situation. Now, with that in mind, the investment that so many different companies are making right now in regards to beefing up their infotech, beefing up their infosec, sorry, and making sure that they are as watertight as possible is huge. There's some very scary statistics out there in terms of the number of organizations that not just have been hit, but are anticipating being hit moving forward. And to my mind, it's gone from being a nice to have in terms of having the top technologies and the top people in place to manage this. It's becoming a table stakes element. Another trend that I would say I would also voice very much what Mark was saying. It relates to AI and the fact that AI has become much more mainstream over the course of the past 12 months. And I think what we're seeing is that the AI technology itself has become much more sophisticated, much more robust. Where I think we're seeing a bit of a disconnect, and what I've seen over the past 12 months, is the extent to which organizations are able to deploy AI in a robust manner. So it's great to have the artificial intelligence, but unless you've got a tool that will really leverage it, as Mark was referring to, being able to have a discussion with a chatbot about James Joyce is a fantastic example. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of organizations out there deploying frontline technologies that are potentially powered by AI, but the interface is still not able to leverage the capacity of what the AI can do, and still drives a limited consumer experience. And just finally, this whole idea about virtualization, Mark referenced gig working. There's no two ways about it. This model is very much something that has come to the forefront in 2022. I would also say the whole idea about hybrid working and the enablement of people to work some days in an office, some days working out of their residence or working remotely in a secure environment, or a mandated environment that ticks all the compliance boxes, is very much, I think, something that is being discussed and it's being put into practice. 2022, I think, validated this model. Where I think in 2023 we're going to be going is trying to figure out how this model balances out in terms of proportions spent at home or proportions spent working out of a facility. There's no two ways about it. There's definitely a lot happening in this regard, but when it comes right down to it, we can see that this is a structural part about how outsourcing is being run. Again, I think Mark laid out some really, really good ones there. And just to pick up on his discussion about the metaverse, I absolutely see this traction happening right now. There's much more practical discussion about the metaverse as an environment in terms of our social lives, in terms of our lives as consumers, etc., than there ever has been before, even our lives as professionals. I think Mark is spot on in regards to what he said about the fact that this is going to require some baby steps. It's not going to be something that we're all going to be diving into. There's still a lot of confusion about how the metaverse is going to play out. It's still very confusing for me as a consumer, and for me as simply a citizen who's a social being, to know how I can get involved with the metaverse. What do I need to do? How do I equip myself? How do I get online with it? So there will be definitely a move towards this, and I think 2023 will be very much a year that's going to be catalytic in that regard. Probably more people are going to find their way into the metaverse than ever before. And I just highlight that at a recent conference that I partnered on, CX Outsourcers, Stephen Loyne from Trends Owls gave a tremendous presentation talking about the impact of the metaverse over the long term. And for me, it really hit home. But again, this is not going to be a short-term play. This is something that's going to take months, if not years, I think, really to come into its own. Think back to what the World Wide Web was like back in 1994, 95, when people, when my age, when you were in university, we started getting online and figuring out what it meant. Then businesses started figuring out what it meant for commerce and so forth. It all just, it steamrolled, it snowballed, and I think we're going to see that with the metaverse. There's a couple of other things, Irina, I would just like to touch on. Agent empowerment and the user experience from the employee standpoint. We're hearing a lot right now about employee experience. And that just doesn't come down to how you're treated by your supervisor or how you're treated in regards to your dealings with coworkers, et cetera. It also comes down to the experience you have using the tools at your disposal. And one of the things that I've picked up on in terms of the outsourcing community over the course of the past several months is a willingness to invest in making sure that individual employees are dealing with as few amounts of tools as they need to. They're trying to streamline operations. They're trying to make that user interface that much more practical, as opposed to having to deal with multiple databases. Only deal with a couple that are very easy to manipulate and get information that you require literally at your fingertips. One of the big elements that we find from the perspective of outsourcing employees is the frustration of having to deal with antiquated tools, having to deal with multiple tools, many of which don't speak to each other very well. So I think we should be watching out for that in terms of the investments that the outsourcing community puts into place. Equally speaking, I think that there's going to be a growth in terms of what I would say robust AI-driven frontline interfaces. And I go back to what Mark was talking about earlier with regards to the chatbot with which he was able to have a literary discussion. I think that you're going to see a lot more organizations putting into practice the investments that they need to make with regards to finding the right tools that are not just going to give you a basic answer that you probably could have found on an FAQ or on some type of a user forum, but ones that are actually going to be practically driven and that are going to learn from different interactions. And somebody who Mark knows very well, a friend of ours called Leanne Rollins, has been involved with one of these intelligent chatbots that's doing just some amazing things in the UK for different retailers and for local councils. I think that in 2023, we're going to see this becoming much more as part of the norm as opposed to the exception. If we're taking a look at the industry from a top line, a 40,000-foot view, geopolitical awareness has been very big in 2022 for reasons obvious, and I think that that's going to continue into 2023. The reality is it's not just Central Eastern Europe that's having issues right now. We are seeing tensions that are ratcheting up in parts of Asia. We're seeing some elements of commotion happening in different parts of Latin America. Mark, most recently in Brazil, you had an election and it was very uncertain how that was going to play out. And I think now there's going to be much more of a focus on what's happening in different countries and different regions politically as outsourcing clients and the outsourcers themselves make decisions on what type of work they're going to situate in different parts of the world, or whether or not they're actually going to situate in certain parts of the world. These are very big considerations to take into account. And with that in mind, I also think that we need to consider the fact that for the longest time, there have been 3 or 4 different countries that have really been the established BPO destinations, the established IT service destinations in terms of delivery. This is not to say that these spots, whether it's India, the Philippines, South Africa, Egypt, or Mexico, are going to evaporate. By no means. But rather, I think that what you're going to see in 2023 is going to be a renewed push to try and see what can be done in terms of leveraging new destinations or emerging destinations that are out there. It could be locations that we're hearing talked about a lot right now. Rwanda is a good example. We're hearing also a lot of discussion about the Republic of Georgia. There's a lot happening right now in terms of burgeoning nearshore and offshore locations that are positioning themselves as logical go-tos in regards to what can be done for back office or front office business process management, as well as information technology management. And just finally, I just want to touch on another trend that, again, we spoke about a little bit earlier, but I think really has resonance going into 2023. And that's the whole element about how the hybrid working model is going to play out. You know, Mark very eloquently made the point that when we've looked at home working over the course of 2020 up until now, it's gone from being something that everybody scrambled in a Dunkirk-like fashion to manage. And now it's become very structural with processes and technologies in place to facilitate it. What I'm going to be looking for in the coming year is the extent to which different industries establish what a norm is going to be in terms of the time that they want their agents working from remote locations. We're going to be looking to see if there's any geographically, if there's any going to be rules that are going to be put in place legislating around this. We've seen some of this in different offshore destinations thus far. How is this going to play out? And are we going to see on perhaps a sector level or a country level what is going to be seen as a practical or an acceptable amount of time working remotely versus working within a facility? And equally, I think we're going to see what the pushback is going to be from the labor force on this. As we know, the labor force has become very tight in both established domestic demand locations as well as in some of the offshore. What's that labor flexibility going to look like in terms of delivering outsourced services? And that's going to have a big impact on the extent to which you see organizations either mandate coming back into a facility most of the time or full time versus giving a little bit more flexibility in order to keep talented labor.